Hello and welcome to the Cloud Therapist Shorts. I'm Richard Simon. The UK government has made a very surprising but positive announcement quite recently, all around AI. They posted something about various major UK investments in the AI field by a number of leading AI vendors. We might get a chance to go through those. But before we get into all of that, let me introduce you to my guest for this talk, Amanda Brock. Amanda Brock is the CEO for OpenUK. Welcome, Amanda. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, Richard. Thanks very much for having me along to talk about this exciting news.
Indeed, absolute pleasure to have you. Amanda, there was lots of announcements in this UK government sort of post that we picked up on. You and I have kind of been offline talking about it and going back and forth about the details of it. But there was one particular aspect of it that you I think wanted to focus on and actually go through first, and maybe we'll kind of just go through some of the others and get your take on those as well. Now, the one that you wanted to look at was the UK government's announcement of open sourcing their so-called Inspect project code, which is by the AI Safety Institute. That's, I think, the institute is kind of the UK government that kind of looks after all of sort of AI activities and things like that in the UK. What was the kind of thing that you picked up on that specifically?
Oh, it's an absolutely massive announcement. And the UK, if you speak to anybody outside the UK and you mention open source and they're really from the open source community, they'll sort of nod sagely and say, oh yes, the UK's always been good at open source. And, you know, back in 2012, Francis Maud's Cabinet Office created the first open source first strategy globally, the first policy globally in that space. And we sort of developed a name for it that those of us really in open source would sort of shrug about and go, oh, you know, there's so much more we need to do. And after the AI Safety Summit back in November, Oliver Dowden was quoted being pro-open source. And of course, at the summit, there was no conversation about open source, no official one. It wasn't on the agenda, although we know the Chinese and French brought it up. But since then, we've seen a shift, and we've seen this shift being publicly announced on Friday. The AI Security Institute, AISI as it's called, was created at that summit back in November. And one of the things it got was a commitment from some of the major AI players to have their platforms tested before release and in some cases during release. So on an ongoing basis, the UK's approach is a very practical one. Rather than legislating, they want to test the AI platforms. Now, we started to see criticism in the press that, you know, 6 months had gone by and this wasn't happening.
Right.
And not only have they announced the platform so that the testing can start, but they've announced that it's going to be open source and it's actually being shared on an MIT permissive open source license. So why do we care? Well, we care because effectively that platform will become a digital public good. But also what it means is that open source can position the platform to become the center of the AI ecosystem. Now, you've probably got an audience that's full of people who understand open source really well, and they understand that sharing it via GitHub, sharing it with an open source license means that it can be utilized, and it can be utilized in lots of different ways. So if you're going to build your own testing platform, you'll recycle and reuse what's there. You won't go and build it from scratch. You know, you'll, quote, stand on the shoulders of giants. But you will also, if you're going to have your code tested, find it much easier, or your platform tested, you'll find it much easier if you've got that transparency that open source brings, because you'll need to interface with it. And you can build the apps, you can build the APIs that you need, you can build the interfaces that you need into the testing platform. Whatever systems you're using and whatever platform you have, you can build that bridge by its being open source. Now, that's super important because it enables the process, but it also enables the build of an ecosystem collaborating around the UK's platform. And what we've seen over the last 3 to 5 years, but the last decade, is if you want to build a position in any technology, the fastest way to do that is by having an open source ecosystem.
Right.
You know, proprietary systems can't compete with that. They just cannot create that ubiquity, that adoption. Now, and remember here, what we're talking about is a software platform. We're not talking about AI itself. We're talking about the platform. And that's something that's a massive shift for the UK, you know, seeing us actively open sourcing something, a tool that will be a globally used tool in AI, and that potentially will help the UK to be positioned in a central place. You know, we're number 3 apparently in the business of AI. This will help us to be number 1 in AI testing.
Indeed, and certainly some of the other announcements in the same post as well are all kind of going towards that, and hopefully that will bump us up in that particular list. Now, the other point I think that I picked up on this particular AI Safety Institute open sourcing the Inspect project was that framework, because kind of AI is quite pioneering at the moment. There's lots happening every week. There's a new announcements of a new model and various other things going on from all the major players. So there's a lot of pioneering there. So I think this will help with kind of standardizing some of that sort of testing. And you could almost sort of get to the point where that aspect of the industry is really sort of self-policing, self-monitoring. So when it comes to ticking boxes for for the government or for privacy or sovereignty, of things like that, you've kind of almost done your homework already by embedding this framework into your model and kind of being part of your testing.
That's right. And what the Institute said right from the start is that there's so much going on, we will never be able to test and approve everything out there.
Yeah.
But by creating this open platform, people can self-test. They can go into the platform, they can use it. They don't need to sign up to a license. You know, the MIT license is there and creates a flow through. And what that means is that the industry, as you say, will almost be able to self-regulate. And that's so critical that we set a standard and that standard can be met. Now, add to that back in the beginning of April, April Fool's Day, 1st of April, let's not go into that in too much detail, but the UK and US set up the UK and US set up an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding Agreement, around testing. And that means that we've already got buy-in from the US to work with us. So I believe they're number 1 in the world, so number 1 and 3 getting together. There's this open source piece that hopefully the US will build on. Why would they create something new? It makes it easier. So one of the things we constantly hear is pushback about regulation that's different country by country. And instead of having different degrees of regulation, what you've got is a tool, and you've got an open source tool that enables anyone to have access to it to do that testing. So rather than have a compliance burden and a risk that you are regulating the small players out of the market with a regulatory capture, what you're doing is enabling an open, accessible testing system, a tool that's available to everybody at no cost. And I think that's a critical and smart shift.
Absolutely, yeah. I think, and kind of just, putting it on the usual, sort of platforms like GitHub and what have you, that kind of really is as accessible and as open as you can probably make it. Now, there were also some, just kind of wanted to get your take on some of the other aspects of the announcements as well. Like I said, the actual post is huge. I will include a link of that in the description of the video, but it was just kind of interesting that there were announcements from a number of leading and startup vendors from the AI space, all basing their HQ in the UK. So that was again part of the announcements. The likes of CoreWeave and Scale AI. Microsoft recently announced their AI hub in London as well, which is quite interesting. OpenAI again has also announced that they will be their HQ will be the European HQ will be in the UK, based in the UK, as well as Anthropic and various other ones as well. So we'll kind of try and provide a little bit more detail on that. So that was definitely interesting. That's, I think, maybe showing this kind of belief in that the UK is really has an open door and is welcoming and is open for innovation in the AI space.
I think we've always been recognized across the globe as innovators. You know, we have a great university system. We have lots of international as well as UK students in that. And I don't think anybody would ever challenge our ability to innovate. And we are a rich seam of talent for international companies. You know, within our open source communities, many of us work for those international companies, which sort of puts us under the radar a bit. But also we see UK businesses regularly being sold to the US. Even the jewel in the crown, DeepMind, and the AI crown was sold back in 2013, I think, off the top of my head, to Google. So, you know, Google DeepMind, we see a lot of these companies coming in as being companies that are international rather than UK homegrown companies. And I think there's a piece that we are still missing in the jigsaw. And that piece is enabling companies to scale within the UK and building out not just technological and AI and dev skills within the UK, engineering skills within the UK, but then learning how to grow our own businesses and hold ownership. And if we can't do that, we will never get to the position we could. I mean, we're doing better, right? Seeing those companies come in is a good thing. You know, it cannot be bad. And I suspect that some of it will be down to the EU's approach to regulation. You know, we've talked before about me being an ex-lawyer. I spent 25 years as a lawyer, and I think I'm able to say that the solution is often a technological one when you have a technology challenge. And creating effective management within those technology tools rather than putting a law in place, because the laws don't flex fast enough. They're not agile enough to keep up with the innovative changes. But having that sort of regulatory layer that's light touch, and having tools that create that environment you want to achieve, I think is a much smarter approach and much more likely to work. So unusually, I say unusually, but I find myself doing it 3 or 4 times in the last year around AI. I'm agreeing with Rishi Sunak that this is the right approach, a practical, pragmatic tool that's publicly available to everybody, that's open sourced, rather than pages and pages of legislation that only the big guys can comply with.
Agreed. Yeah, I think if they probably had a lot of legislation, probably have to put it through an AI to get a summary of it anyway. So,
do you know, they're also looking at building reams of standards that will take years to get approved. And you know, the standards world is great, but it's also a little bit old-fashioned and it's slow, and you have to be bought in, you have to have the money to be part of that process. Whereas here, what we're doing is democratizing technology. We're not just enabling innovation, we're enabling compliance with the standards of innovation. And I think that's critical.
Yeah, and there, and again, I mean, the post was kind of waxing lyrical about, you know, we are pro open source. Open source drives innovation. It creates startups. It creates communities. So that was kind of very endorsing, I think.
Can you imagine my Friday night seeing that at the end of my day? It was lots of fun around here, lots of people engaging and talking about how great it was to see.
Yeah, that
They
was really
also
good.
talk about an open source day, and what we need to make sure is that that open source day actually gets into the submarine that I like to talk about. The 27% contribution to GVA from the open source communities in the UK is driven by people who are often under the radar, but who have deep expertise in open source. And I think now what we need to make sure is that Number 10 and the AI Institute engage with those people, and not people who become open source experts in the last 18 months since we suddenly became a fashionable term in AI.
Yes, indeed. And then the last point, just very briefly, is the announcement again from the same post. Like I said, the post is a treasure. It's a treasure trove, isn't it? Somebody just kind of did a copy and paste of all their notes. Is the building of this supercomputer based in Bristol. It's a £1.5 billion investment, and I did look that up. That's $1.8 billion. I did my conversion. And it's going live this summer. It's a cluster of 5,000 NVIDIA GPUs. Not sure which model, but we'll come back to that maybe later on. And it's going to coincide with the Dawn computer in Cambridge as well. And all of these are aimed at startups and academia as well. So that's going to be really interesting, because apparently the AI industry in the UK has kind of got a £3.7 billion growth. It's already kind of worth that much. And it's employing over 50,000 people already.
I think it has a great future, but we have to contextualize this, right? So there's a lot of money there, a lot of billions, but Meta has invested 40 billion in the last 12 months. And if you scale that by the, you know, the 8 or so big tech companies, what we have is a drop in the ocean.
Yeah.
And whilst that might enable innovation, if that innovation isn't going to be in an environment where it stays in the UK, it all becomes a little bit pointless. Not entirely, because it's good to be innovators, you know, it's good to be at the forefront of that. It's good to engage. It will build jobs. And we're seeing it attracting companies into the UK. But what we really want to see is some of that ownership and power staying in the UK economy, because we are sadly very behind. Yeah. And, you know, Sunak's just come off this 1 hour presentation that he did through Policy Exchange today. For that shift to really happen and our futures to be stable in the UK, we need to be generating revenue around our innovation.
Yeah, I agree. Excellent. Okay. All right. Well, that's all the time that we have for talking. I'm sure there's lots more that we can dig into and expand on it. So Amanda, really appreciate you coming on to do this. Thanks very much for doing this talk. All the links for OpenUK, the UK government announcement, and lots more information will be in the description of the video. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support me, and thank you for watching.